Hello and welcome to the universe of God. Today we are going to start to discover the signs of the time that Jesus talked about as we uncover the sign of Jonah, the days of Noah, and the new age of Aquarius. So let's begin to take an in-depth look into the signs of the time. So the sign of Jonah, the age of Aquarius, and the days of Noah have tremendous significance and layer upon layer of meaning. Jesus had spoken to a group of religious leaders known as the Pharisees in his time, and he gave them a distinct sign. Before Jesus gave this sign, he informed these religious leaders that he knew that they always sought a sign, and he was going to give them one, but it would be one with obvious yet hidden interpretations. And that is what has also inspired me to study this and share it with you, because I think it's time that we really understand what's not only obvious about these signs of the time, but what their hidden interpretations are. In fact, regarding the religious leaders, the Pharisees, if they were truly understanding of the very scriptures and messages that they claimed to live by, then they would have caught on to some of the obvious interpretation of the sign that Jesus gave. But instead, like many do, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Zealots, they missed it, and thereby they missed the very Messiah that they waited for, this long-awaited and anticipated coming of a Savior. They missed it. Well, the sign that Jesus gave them is something that we need to understand, right? So we're going to look into the scriptures and let them speak. Matthew 12, verse 38 through 42. It reads, "Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, 'Teacher, we want to see a sign from you.' He answered, 'A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now something greater than Jonah is here. The queen of the south will rise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and now something greater than Solomon is here." So clearly, obviously, Jesus is speaking to them regarding, the Ninevites who were wicked. They were not, priests of God. They were not Israelites. They were Gentiles. They were wicked, but they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And Solomon, with all his wisdom, even the Queen Sheba came, from the other end of the continent, or, far away, just to hear of his wisdom. And Jesus is telling them now something greater than Jonah is here. Something wiser than Solomon is here. Yet you don't even perceive it. So that's, more obvious interpretation right there. But in Matthew 12, 38 through 40, and also in Luke chapter 11, verse 29 through 30, Jesus uses the sign of Jonah to let the Pharisees know that ultimately they're rejecting the one who was greater than the prophet Jonah, and they're really rejecting their promised Messiah and awaited Savior. So Jesus goes on to tell them that because of this, they will also suffer condemnation at the last judgment by these Ninevites. These Jews would not be a part of the first resurrection, because unlike the Ninevites, they remained unrepentant. When we look at the words of Jesus to the Pharisees, we see an allegory in his analogy to them regarding the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah hated the Ninevites and thought them to be undeserving of mercy, forgiveness, and grace, so too did the Jews and the Pharisees believe themselves to be better than the Gentiles, despising the Gentiles. Now, you need to catch this, because again, just as Jonah hated the Ninevites, the Gentiles, so too did the Pharisees and the Jews look down on the Gentiles. Okay? This is important for us. And there's a reason why Jesus is mentioning this because now Jesus is on the scene and he's here to show not judgment, even though he's qualified to judge, but mercy and grace. And he's coming for the lost sheep of Israel, but he's coming for those who are also lost, period. He is also coming for the Gentiles, as is evident. So the Jews looked at the Gentiles as unclean, like swine, and this perception caused them to refrain from reaching out to the Gentile nation and instead withholding the light of God's holy word from them. And God's holy word, of course, is the Torah, the law. And we know that, in the New Testament, it talks about hiding your lamp under a table, that we're not to hide our lamp under a table, but we're to put it on top of the table so it can shine brightly and be a light to others. So this is something that Jesus is really condemning, them hiding this light from others. According to Helena Lehman of Pillars of Enoch, Language of God and Humanity, she mentions by Jesus' request to others to keep the miracles they'd witnessed secret, he may have used this as an illustrative example of how the Jews were in fact hiding their lamps under a bushel. That's in Matthew 5:15, and failing to share God's miraculous power to the Gentile nation. This very well may be why Jesus chose to request the secrecy of those who witnessed his miracles. If so, then we could see Jesus mirroring the Pharisees to themselves by hiding his own divinity, miraculous acts, and hiding God from them, just as they had also hidden these things from others they deemed unworthy. Again, this is important for us to catch and to grasp a hold of, because Jesus very well could be mirroring us to ourselves in this regard of hiding our light from others. He's hidden his light from others as well, right? That's why it takes faith to believe. It takes faith. Faith activates our ability to see this light. Believe, faith and belief. So we're going to cross over a little bit as we go into the end time signs. And with the end time signs, we're going to reference the Passover, the Last Supper, and the upper room of Aquarius. So before we delve deeper into the sign of Jonah, I really want to reference more about the days of Noah, because this was also something that Jesus spoke of, and he gave us another sign with similarities to that of the sign of Jonah. So these are things that we can't ignore. We need to look into them. We find this reference being made by Jesus in Matthew 24:37 as he discusses signs of the end times with his disciples. And again, these are associated by Jesus himself with signs of the end times. Matthew 24 verse 37 reads, "As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and given in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." Because Jesus is giving these signs, we ought to hone in on them and seek to understand them. Jonah, like Noah, was cast into a sea of chaos, dealing with a large territory of wickedness. God also gave them a 40-day commission, so we can begin to see already these two biblical characters and stories share some common ground. Yet I believe this sign, along with the sign of Jonah, are connected to the age of Aquarius. While Jesus is dropping signs on different sects of people, he is also dropping another sign, but this one is found in the heavens. And this sign is referenced shortly before the betrayal of Judas, when Jesus would be leaving his disciples and going to be sacrificed, and it is also during the Last Supper in preparation for the Passover. Again, great significance here. Jesus is giving a sign during a time when three important things are taking place, and they are all associated with his departure. And I believe that this sign was given by Christ to speak to the last generation who will prepare for the supper with the bridegroom in the age when they would meet him again. Without further ado, let's go to Luke 22, verse 8 through 10. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." "Where do you want us to prepare for it?" they asked. He replied, "As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters, and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asked, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, all furnished. Make preparations there." The sign of Aquarius is of a man holding a water pitcher from an upper room, the upper heavens, and we are to prepare there for the wedding supper with the bridegroom, as is mentioned in Revelation 19:9. Just as the disciples were preparing, Jesus is telling us that this is the way to go and prepare to be united or married to him, and we will celebrate this Holy Communion in heaven, in the upper room or the room upstairs. Ironically enough, the reference to the wedding supper is given in the last book of the Bible in Revelation. Why is that? Well, perhaps it's because it is a revelation of a deeper truth and a revelation of something for the last generation and the end time children of the Most High God. Without going into too much examination of this particular sign right now, we're going to continue on in our study, starting with the sign of Jonah and leading into the others, as I do my best to tie them uniquely together and wrap them in a gift just for you to receive. So please come back and join me in part 2 as we discuss the folly of the Pharisees, more on the sign of Jonah, and the neglect for the ministry of mercy and forgiveness. Thank you for tuning in to part 1. I will see you in part 2 as we go into the sign of the end times regarding the sign of Jonah, the days of Noah, and the age of Aquarius. Until next time, take care and God bless.